Good afternoon, sir.
Very good afternoon. This is the third attempt.
Yes, sir.
So you never got selected in the last one.
No, sir. I appeared for the interview in the last attempt, but I could not make it to the final list.
And where is it that you got poor marks?
Sir, I lacked marks in my mains examination.
In your optional?
So optional was decent. I got around 262 marks in my law optional, but in the GS subjects, there was a scope for improvement.
Okay. So this brings you back to it.
Yes,
Okay.
sir.
So and you're presently working in a law firm.
No, sir.
So stop working.
Yes, sir. Sir, after my graduation, I worked with Pratham for around 6 months, but I didn't take up full time career in a law firm. I had interned in law firms, but not worked as associate there.
So do you have a license to practice law?
Yes, sir.
You have a license.
Yes, sir.
So you don't intend to do anything with it. So it's only your civil services that you're concentrated on. You're just working with your civil services.
Sir, right now I'm also mentoring students, but that is out of my own will, not associated with any coaching institute, but mentoring students about law examinations, law entrance examinations.
Okay, law entrance exams. So nothing to do with the civils.
No, sir.
Okay. Very interesting. Very interesting. For anyway, we have a paucity of lawyers. We have a paucity of courts. We have a paucity of so many things as far as the legal establishment is concerned. So it's like a difficult situation in which we are. Hmm? So it's like good that there's somebody who has done law but is not practicing it as of now. How many more attempts would you be interested in henceforth?
Sir, I have been selected as assistant commander in CAPF, so I would be joining that service in the later this year if I'm not selected in this attempt.
So this has happened this year itself.
Yes, sir, in February.
Okay. So finally, your job is cut out. But a law graduate who has been doing law, going to the CAPF,
Yes, sir.
wouldn't practicing law be a better option than that?
So I would say all these options would have their own merits and all opportunities. But I feel that civil service or CAPF would provide me a thing like the work there would be very challenging and dynamic. So that would be a thing which would keep me on my toes and give me opportunity to grow more. So that's why I have taken that field.
But the law won't. The law won't. The law won't. What part of the law you have not thought also of pursuing a specialization in it henceforth?
Um, Sir, as of now, I'm not considering LLM as an option, but in future, I might be going for LLM.
Okay. You write emails to editors. Why?
Sir, to express my opinion, I just
For,
share my opinion. Yes, sir.
for that, you have a social media platform. Now, why do you need to write an email to an editor? ईमेल टू एन
Sir,
एडिटर वो पढ़ेगा फेंक देगा वो क्या होगा उसका कुछ भी नहीं होगा यू गो टू सोशल मीडिया प्लेटफॉर्म द होल वर्ल्ड विल हियर यू huh so what is the last topic on which you have written the email?
yes, sir. So, that was around a couple of weeks back. That was about rule of law versus rule by law. That was an article in Indian Express, and it was my comment on that article.
Did they publish it?
No, sir, it didn't get published.
Obviously no one does that sort of thing. That's the reason why I said editors don't publish things. Had you put it on a social media platform, they would have it, the whole world would have heard about it. What was the argument? Rule of law, rule by law.
Yes, sir.
So what is the argument of the article?
Yes, sir. Sir, rule of law essentially means that the law is supreme in any country. Law would be written, it would be supreme, and it can be amended whimsically. Rule by law is also similar. The only caveat being rule of law ensures that there cannot be any arbitrary law. So rule of law ensures that there is supremacy of law. Along with that, the law is equally applicable to all, and there is no arbitrariness in the law. Whereas rule by law might be lacking that no arbitration, no arbitrary principle.
Okay. Okay. So this is what the article said.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Okay. And what was your comment on it?
So it was a short comment wherein I said, I try to bring in Professor A.V. Dicey in the discussion. Professor A.V. Dicey has described rule of law through his three-pronged method, and rule by law does not fits into the definition of rule of law given by Professor A.V. Dicey.
Okay. Okay. Vasu, tell me one thing.
Yes, sir.
I'm obviously not going to talk about the Indian scene. Let's just focus our attention on so many other things because there's so many other things we're talking about. So if you look at, say, for example, China,
Yes, sir.
especially in the context of this place called as Hong Kong, where they have uh, practically walked away from their commitments, which were made in 1997 when Hong Kong became a part of China, that there would be a certain sort of rule of law which would be implemented for the next 50 years since 1997. And now, with the sort of changes which are afoot in terms of how would the legislative council get elected, it seems Hong Kong has made a transition to something much beyond from rule of law. This is ruled by law, but this is ruled by law as dictated by the party.
Yes,
And these types of things are seen in so many countries. If you look at Hungary, you look at Turkey, you look at Poland, which is a classical example in the last couple of weeks. I don't know if you're aware of the way in which the Polish government has been defying the European Union with its fabulous idea of appointing judges to its highest court, the Constitutional Court. So there's this sort of an urgency which you find in so many countries across the world of riding roughshod. Is this about the times in which we are living in, or is this about the peculiarity of this concept called as rule of law itself? That these types of things are happening. So if I look at it from one end of the world to the other end of the world, it seems that rule of law is given a short shrift. So is it about the times in which we are living? Go on.
So I feel that, I feel that there are different issues to it. I will not deny that the current geopolitics has a consideration to play. However, given the examples, many of the countries in which we are seeing this change are authoritarian or are following. They are not purely democratic, and thus we do not find strong institutions to protect the democracy or protect the rule of law. And thus we are seeing a swift change from rule of law to rule by law, wherein law is supreme, but law need not essentially be moral or good for the public. This is the first reason which I think. Secondly, I feel that, sir, these things, this change which is happening is not happening throughout the world. There are democracies which are upholding rule of law. A very good example of this would be Nepal, wherein the former prime minister tried to dissolve the house twice, but the institutional supremacy of Supreme Court ensured that there is no subversion of the constitution, and upheld by taking a very strong decision of reinstigating the house, upheld the rule of law in the country of Nepal.
Okay. Good, but I don't know as to what end would it be worked, and what happens if the government falls. Open to abuse. It's just because he didn't get a chance to fix the process of appointing judges. That's the only thing that can be said in their defense. And the Nepalese politicians, it's only now that they have realized that they just don't have a foolproof process by which they can have a tab over appointing judges. अगली बार वो जब चुन के आएंगे ना, that's the next big thing that they're going to do. They're going to fix up the constitution and see to it that the process of appointing judges is what is brought under control. And then possibly also going to find a way of appointing retired judges to legislatures. That's also one of the most effective ways of keeping them in line. So करेंगे वो जरूर करेंगे. अच्छा, on a second note, there's this loud talk all across the world of a global minimum corporate tax.
Yes, sir.
Okay, the American Federal Reserve has started the process. A lot of countries, including India, have said yes to it. Now, as a student of law, what practical problems do you envisage in terms of getting this done, in terms of getting this sort of a thing being made something that is mandatory? And then the second big problem in terms of implementing it.
Yes, sir. So, legally, if I speak the legal problem, I think the first legal problem would be having a global consensus and getting the draft ready with respect to global minimum corporate taxation. So there are different smaller countries which are getting the advantage of tax avoidance, which they would be not accommodative to it. Secondly, various MNC, the issue of tax avoidance, which has been talked about by even the OECD in BEPS, that need to be taken into consideration, because that this is getting a minimum global taxation on companies will not be an easy task with respect to drafting a law. Sir, secondly, coming to the geopolitical situation or the practical thing, I feel that getting it accepted by companies and all the nations would be a very tricky thing, apart from the drafting thing. So we have seen that although the Cornwall G7 consensus has talked about it, but various nations are not receptive to it. And even if we see in India, there are some taxations which can resemble to this. So Indian government might also be might not be very receptive to give away a part of sovereign taxation rights to that global order. So these issues might crop up in with respect to global taxation.
Since you brought it up, the Cairn Energy Project and its problems with the Indian authorities. Are you aware of that?
Yes, sir. I've read about it, sir.
Okay, so this whole idea of seizing assets, and there's quite a controversy going in terms of can assets be seized, can assets not be seized, and so on and so forth. So just to put things in their right perspective, in your view, as a student of law, can assets be fixed? Can they go about grabbing assets of the Indian state? Is that even possible?
So because it was an arbitral award, and the award was delivered by an international institution. Justice Midha has said in various judgments that when a sovereign is entering into commercial transaction, then that act of entering into commercial transaction by itself ensures that the sovereign is giving up its sovereign immunity, and thus the award can be enforced against a sovereign country, and the defense of immunity cannot be taken up by the sovereign. So secondly, I would say that although in this case attachments of assets is possible legally speaking, however, I do not feel that the company Cairn, the route which has taken, for example, filing a case in France court for direct attachment of property without even coming for the execution stage. Second, filing a case in USA for attachment of assets of Air India, which is essentially not equivalent to the sovereign of India. So these, I feel, those steps have been taken in haste, and they might not qualify as legally sound steps, especially with respect to Air India attachment.
No, Air India to chodo, but there are so many other assets which are definitely under threat now. So
Yes, sir.
Air India, there's a doubt whether they can do it about Air India. Have there been examples in the past where this has been done about any other country?
Sir, as far as I am aware, there are around 20 countries for which the assets have been attached or freezed.
So this has happened in the past.
Sir, in my limited opinion, this has happened in past.
Okay.
And that's why there are concerns that India has entered into a wrong group of 20 countries. No, that is bringing a bad light to India.
Yeah. So this is a definite problem that needs a resolution. Okay. in the Indian context, if one is to come back to it, um, there's a how many vacancies are we looking at when it comes to Supreme Court of India?
So the sanction stand is 34, and I guess after the the recent retirements, there are around 4 to 5 vacancies. I'm not very sure of the numbers, sir, but around 4 to 5 vacancies are there in the
There are four
Supreme
to five
Court
vacancies which are
presently.
available there. And as far as the high courts are concerned, put together,
So more than 400 vacancies in the High Court out of
so
1200
what?
seats.
So now, what is holding back things?
So one of the very major defect in appointment is with respect to the mode of appointment, which is the power rest with collegium. If we see the tenure of last CGI, that is Chief Justice, the Honorable Chief Justice Mr. Bobde, during his tenure, no such appointment was made, and the whole year no appointment is made, and thus the numbers have increased. Second, the memorandum of procedure between the government and the Supreme Court is still to be finalized, which is still languishing. So these are some of the issues with respect to appointments of judges at the higher courts.
Now, under the present Chief Justice, has the collegium met even once?
Sir, I'm not aware of this development, sir.
No. So you're not aware whether they have met even once or whether they have tried to schedule a meeting. Now, the whole problem is since there is the pandemic situation going on, it becomes the easier way out for so many people to keep saying that, since the pandemic is going on, meetings can't be scheduled, things can't be done. But then the sort of problems that you end up with, that we are ending up with. So one is the paucity of judges that
Yes, sir.
need to be put into place as far as this whole thing is concerned. And until and unless you don't appoint judges, there's not much that can be done about it. Okay, so that's one big problem. In terms of other issues, paucity of judges is one major problem. Of the other issues, which in your opinion is a very critical one that needs to be addressed as urgently as is possible, so that this idea of rule of law in the Indian context can inspire more
Yes, sir.
confidence and can in some way or the other, make folks feel that, well, it's not just that justice has been done, but we are also seeing justice being done.
Yes, sir. So, so I feel that amendments in the procedural law, basically which have been highlighted by Justice Malik Math in his recommendations, those need to be worked upon. So if those could be worked upon, we could be targeting various like you or ailments of judiciary. First would be pendency of cases. Second would be low conviction rate, and third would be better trust between the judiciary, lawyers, and the public. So if procedural laws could be amended to a certain degree.
They need to be. Okay, okay. Um, Sedition, the court has once again thrown the ball in the executive's court. This idea that we feel that this needs to be done. So it's like back to the executive, back to the parliament. What holds the court from striking it down?
So legally speaking, sedition is a constitutionally valid law. The problem comes to sedition is with respect to the execution of the law, wherein there we see certain misuse of the law. Because sedition law in itself, section 124A, has three explanations to it, which are giving that no, in each and every case of dissent cannot be a case of sedition. There has to be incitement. This provision is there. This caveat is there in the provision itself. So it is a constitutionally valid law, and that has been tested time and again. So what we need to do with respect to sedition is to sensitize the executive machinery about when to charge this section and when not to. So I think that the problem is at the executive state, not as the judicial or legislative stage.
No, but my point is simple. If the court feels that this is a law which is outlived its utility and has this whole problem of very low convictions at the end of the day. So yeah, you can as well declare that, well, we don't believe that we are going to adjudicate under it. We can just do away with it. Technically there's a problem. Until and unless the law is not dealt off with Parliament itself, there's not much that can be done about it. Okay, and so the court can just keep on appealing for it. There's the Section 66A issue, which has
Yes, sir.
again risen with this whole idea that the court has now almost been agitated by this idea that despite the fact that we have struck it down, people are time and again filing cases under it. So if, that's
Yes,
a
sir.
problem with sedition. Even if the court strikes it down, until and unless it stays in the law books, nothing stops people at the lower levels from filing cases under it. Right now. So same with the
Yes, sir.
problem with sedition. So even if the court tomorrow says that okay, we strike it down, but if people keep filing cases at the lower level, since it stays in the law book, is there any other problem with Section 66A?
So with Section 66A of IT Act, the problem was that it was too wide, that it was covering any that it was curtailing freedom of speech, even the legitimate freedom of speech, and thus in the case of Shreya Singhal, the Supreme Court struck it down.
So are there any other problems because of which it has yet stayed on in the way in which it has stayed on? The court has struck it down.
Yes, sir.
So is this merely a communication gap between the court and the lower executive?
So I feel that the sensitization of police and the executive authority has not been done properly. The training part, I would say, and they are not aware of this. Many of the policemen are not aware of this development because it's a 2015 judgment, relatively recent judgment. And if we say police personnel, they are not that young, and the training have taken place in much earlier years. So I feel that might be one of the lacunas wherein they are not aware of the legal developments in this arena.
But the second big thing, Vasu, is why are the lower courts not dealing with this at their level?
Sir, if I may clarify, why are the lower courts not striking the charge sheet filed under 66A?
Exactly.
Are you asking this question, sir? So I feel that that is being done. We see many of the charges being rejected by the lower court on if they are filed under 66A or with respect to sedition, and it's when the report goes to the high courts or Supreme Court, then this come up that such many cases have been filed under this particular section. So I feel that lower judiciary is aware of this and they're doing their part on it. And so sometimes even those cases might go up to high court in that scenario. But I feel lower judiciary is striking those cases down.
It is.
Sir, in my opinion, yes, sir.
Okay.
Because we have not seen we have seen very limited appeals of Section 66A.
Okay, so the Supreme Court's agitation this is basically about cases yet being brought and cases yet being filed.
Yes, sir.
Okay. How bad is the COVID situation in Shahadra?
So COVID sorry, I cannot hear this question properly.
You have mentioned that you come from this area called as Shahadra in New Delhi.
Yes, sir.
So in this area that you come from, how good or how bad is the COVID situation?
Yes, sir. Sir, during the peak of second wave, the problem was glaring because the primary healthcare centers are not very much equipped. So the problem was glaring, but now cases are relatively low. Not more than 400 cases are being reported in the district of Shahadra, and vaccination drives are also taking at a good pace. So we have vaccination centers at different places within the district.
Okay. Why was Delhi particularly hard hit during the second wave?
So I feel that there were different factors to it. First being the virus itself, the mutations in virus. Second and the more prominent reason, which I feel that there was laxity on part of the public and on part of the government. both the public and the government felt that the COVID has almost gone after the December 2020, and public were almost on the streets, and the COVID appropriate behavior was not being observed by the public, neither being enforced by the government. And so, thirdly, vaccination was not being done at a adequate level. So these were the factors which came together, and thus the situation, we saw
So
the
is the
second peak
area
in
where
Delhi.
you are located presently under a lockdown, or has the lockdown been relaxed?
Sir, the lockdown has been relaxed, but now there are partial lockdowns in certain markets. For example, Lakshmi Nagar market is under lockdown, but otherwise the district is not under lockdown.
Okay, okay, okay. Okay. The next question would be raised by Tukaram sir.
Thank you.
Yes, yes. Hello. Now let us
Good
start
afternoon,
with
sir.
Delhi. Yeah, let us start with Delhi. What would be the percentage of people inoculated till date?
Sir, in Delhi, sir,
Yeah.
sir, overall, sir, in Delhi, I'm not aware of this, sir.
Okay.
Overall, in India, 32 crore people have been vaccinated, but of Delhi, I'm not aware of this data, sir. I'll read about it.
Okay. So do you think whatever been done till date, we have been up to the mark or lagging behind in the target?
Sir, if we compare our performance from from January, February, then I would say we have we have made good progress.
Okay.
For example, new centers have been opened up with respect to quarantine centers. Vaccination centers have been doubled in the city of Delhi. Also, the procurement of vaccines and the other healthcare equipments like oxygen, drugs, they have also been stocked up. So I feel that on that part we are prepared, but because we cannot be relaxed at this point, and third wave, there are speculations about third wave. We need to be more concerned about the children and about the elderly population with respect to third wave. So more work on that front needs to be done.
Okay, okay. Now, you can correct me. I have a general feeling that during the second wave, our attention primarily was focused on the impact of the second wave. Okay, that is broadly speaking the health issues, let us say, and the economic distress which was caused by the second wave. Somehow it lagged behind. We did not pay due attention to that issue. So can we say that?
So I feel that in the second wave, when the lockdowns were there and the cases were peaking, people were already people are already aware, or they were used with COVID appropriate behavior, and so there was no sudden disruption in the economic activities, because after the first wave incident, employees were habitual of work from home. The vaccinations were also going on. So compared to first wave, that much disruption we didn't see. Also, there are certain sectors which have shown positive growth rate. For example, agriculture, it grew. E-commerce sites. So there were certain sectors which grew even during the second wave. Thus, I would say that the disruptions were there, but they were not as glaring as they were in the first wave of the pandemic.
Okay, 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 fine. See, Supreme Court of India in 1973, Keshwananda judgment came up with the doctrine of basic structure. Now, in what way the doctrine of basic structure brought in a change in constitutional law? Do you think it brought in some sort of fundamental change?
Yes, sir. So I feel that after that judgment, it ensures. So before the judgment, if we see the trail of judgments from Shankari Prasad to IC Golaknath, there was a tussle between who is supreme, whether the parliament is supreme or the judiciary is supreme. But that judgment put that debate to rest and said that constitution is supreme, neither Supreme Court nor the parliament. So that supremacy of constitution was upheld in that judgment. Second, sir, because basic structure doctrine was enshrined in the constitution, this Supreme Court accepted it. It although gave the power to the parliament to amend any part of the constitution, but it also at the same time restricted the power of the parliament to amend the constitution. So that was a harmonious construction which the Supreme Court brought in with respect to powers of parliament.
There
And
is,
after,
there is,
yes, sir.
okay. So then there is one serious critic of the doctrine, that judiciary acquired a power which was not provided for in the Constitution of India, nor was it hinted at, anticipated.
Sir, I would like to quote here Justice Honorable Justice Chandrachud, who has said, who has given the doctrine of dark matter theory in the Constitution. He says that although there are certain things which are not evident in the Constitution, but just like dark matter, it is not, we are not aware of that, but it is present. Similarly, there are certain concepts in the Constitution which might not be patently written in it, but they exist in the Constitution. Similar is the thing with basic structure. It might not have been expressly mentioned in it, but it has always been there in the Constitution, and the Supreme Court only just made it express by that judgment.
Okay. See, you refer to A.V. Dicey.
Yes, sir.
He was very critical of administrative law. Why was he so critical of administrative law?
Sir, I'm not aware of this. I'll read about him.
Okay. So you didn't read about that, or you are not in a position to recollect.
Sir, I'm unable to connect the dots between his criticism of administrative law.
Okay, so in recent past, National Judicial Service,
yes, sir,
was in news. Okay, to what extent it will help us in dealing with, let us say, judicial reforms?
So if we see presently the state of judiciary, there are high level of vacancies at the lower level. Second, a point which I've mentioned, raised by various Supreme Court judges, that the legal talent is not coming to judiciary. And All India Judicial Service is an attempt to answer both these questions. So when we have All India Judicial Services, it will be bringing in bright minds from various parts of the country. Also, it would be filling in the vacancies at the district level. So both these aspects would be curtailed.
So one would be the vacancies. Okay.
Yes, sir.
Second would be talent.
Yes, sir.
Anything else besides that?
So I feel that in that All India Judicial Service will bring uniformity throughout the district level courts, because it would be a centralized service. So a uniform service would be there at district level. That will be helpful for the judicial service.
Okay. See, there are certain salient features of Constitution of India. Okay. So one is, it is a written constitution, and it is also one of the lengthiest constitution. Now let us focus on the lengthiest one. Okay.
Yes, sir.
Now, how do you look at that? Now, what might have motivated the constitution makers to go for such a lengthy document?
So, because sir, our constitution is lengthy because of various reasons. First being, we have to the constitution is very elaborate and very detailed on almost all parts of the functioning of government. So right from the union to the state to even to the third level of government, all the functions have been mentioned in the constitution, and that has not been left for the parliament to legislate. That being the first. Second being, sir, the constitution is taking care of various diversity of the country, geographical, demographical, resourceful, and those parts. To bring all these parts together, there has to be elaborate provisions in constitution to have unity and diversity. So and third, I feel that, sir, if we see US constitution, that is only 8 articles long, and then the obligation, or there is a duty on the Supreme Court of the USA to interpret the constitution in such a way to extend it to the further generations. A very good example of this would be, sir, the US Constitution does not mention about Air Force of USA, because at the time when US Constitution was drafted, Air Force was not there. Only naval power and army was there. Then it was upon the Supreme Court to interpret it in such a way that Air Force becomes an intrinsic part of that armed forces and naval power provision. So because our constitution drafters didn't want to leave that too much of scope for interpretation, and hence it has become a lengthy constitution.
Okay. See, there are different notions of, let us say, forms of justice. Forms of justice. Okay. So, legal justice. Now, how would you define legal justice? Would it be justice according to law or law according to justice? Which one of the two would you prefer?
So I would say both these would be a conservative way of looking at justice, because even if we say justice according to law, there might be certain situation wherein justice is not done in the wholesome. So legal justice essentially would essentially mean justice according to law, in my opinion, but that will not be complete justice in itself. An example of this would be, sir, the Supreme Court judgment with respect to eviction of forest dwellers, which was given in 2019. So it was according to the legal principles, but the rights of the forest dwellers were in that case not taken into consideration, and the
But
justice was
then,
not done to those forest dwellers.
okay, but then why can't we rely on the second conception? That is the law according to justice.
So in that case, I feel that essentially means equity law and equitable principles, which are not codified, and they give discretionary power to the judge or the judicial organization. And giving too much of discretionary power, because law according to justice would essentially means rewriting of laws every time when there is a change of any situation. So I think that would become too discretionary on the part of both legislature and judiciary. So I feel amalgamation of both would be required in such scenarios.
Okay. Yes. Thank you, Vasu.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.